it's also going to put the scientific community on tilt because you cannot square, you can't square this circle, because here you have human genetic material, or so it appears, at least by a computerized printout. Now remember, to do this manually, when we did the human genome, it took something like $5 billion in a decade. And we're doing something on this creature, just running it through computerized. Now, it's the state-of-the-art systems at Stanford and elsewhere. There are 3 independent labs doing this that are under double-blind studies by one of the most prestigious geneticists in the world, Dr. Nolan, at Stanford. However, if that is true, but then there's this 2 million base pairs and 10% that aren't matching up, and the genes that normally control for skeletal dwarfism or skeletal, what we call dysplasias or abnormalities, those aren't lighting up and aren't being found. Then how do you explain what we call the phenotype? Now I know this is not a medical interview show, but everyone get educated real quickly here. The phenotype is the physical expression of a gene, okay? Like blue eyes, let's say blue eyes, okay? And there are genes that control for the color of your eyes. Everybody knows that. Now, what's interesting is that the genotype isn't matching the phenotype at all. So this is why this is one of the strangest things, and I think it's going to be years of research genetically to get to the bottom of this. And now, because we didn't gather this little body off of a spacecraft that said, hello, we're from this star system, you're never going to be able to say it's ET. But the question is, what is it? And I'm telling you, as a medical doctor who has been consulting with the top team at Stanford University, nobody knows what it is yet. However, in this part of Chile, there is a tradition that they came from the stars, that there were small people that had landed in the area. And we think that this little specimen, this little body, is decades to hundreds of years old. In other words, it predates the modern era of technology. Because some people say, well, maybe it was a human genetic experiment that went wrong. No, it's not, because it predates our ability to do that. We know that from what's called the DNA clock. The amount of cytosine that falls off of the ACTG in your DNA, you can measure and estimate how old the DNA is, and it's old. It's not thousands and thousands of years, like hundreds of thousands, but it's not modern. It's not recent. And you can kind of control for that, although we haven't been able to do the carbon dating yet because we didn't want to use up all of our material until we got the genetics run down, because you can only take so much of this tiny little body without destroying it. So the question becomes, let's say this is a creature, a little being, a little person, a humanoid. It lived decades to a few centuries ago. It may be pre-Columbian. We don't know.
Right.
How was it kept alive? Because we now know it's not an aborted fetus that was grossly deformed, based on the world's expert in skeletal dysplasias who wrote the textbook on the subject, and the opinion of more than one radiologist. We now know that it's got a lot of the same genes we have, and yet there's 2 million base pairs not matching. We know that even today, now I'll tell you, I've unfortunately had to deliver emergently what's called a precipitous delivery, when someone goes into preterm labor and have to deliver some of these really tiny babies, that are, 30, 40 weeks. But this would be on the order of 15 to 25 weeks, in that range at the most. Even today, in your best neonatal intensive care unit, you couldn't keep this creature alive.
No.
How did it live long enough to develop its long bones and its epiphyseal plates to the point that they are, to where this expert is saying it's 6 to 8 years of age and it's only 6 inches tall? It fits in the palm of my hand. So this is extraordinary. Now, we can't say it's ET, but we can't say it's just a normal human finding. It's an unknown humanoid, which still makes this an enormous scientific exploratory adventure. What we have to do is to go back to the Atacama Desert, and here's why. The man at the Institute in Barcelona that is actually physically holding this creature, this little body, went there with another a scientist. And they went to this remote area, and they were told, as they went further and further into remote areas, that there were urns and materials of more of these little bodies that had been found over the years and were kept in containers. Now, they never found them, but if in fact they are there, and Dr. Nolan has said this at Stanford, if you find 2 of these, game over, because you cannot have something that's this obviously different from a human, that's a human genetic defect, and end up with 2 of them that are because there is no syndrome in all of the medical literature that explains this particular morphology or phenotype or skeletal form of this little Atacama humanoid. There's nothing. And it's been exhaustively looked at by the world's expert in that area, Dr. Luckman. So what Dr. Nolan and I have talked about is that if there's a second one of these found, it's kind of game over. But what we have to do is to try to get back down to this area. Now, of course, to do a proper expedition with ground-penetrating radar and sonar and ultrasound and blah and on and on and on is way beyond the funding means that we have. If someone listening wants to fund and underwrite that, I'm all ears. It's way beyond our ability to do. However, it should be done because this could be an enormous discovery. And it's in an area where the native peoples talk about luminous, egg-shaped and disc-shaped craft coming down and going into the foothills of the Andes. And seeing little beings, little creatures that they considered star creatures walking and running around. Now, I've interviewed Ramon in Spain about this, and he has said that when they went there, they heard a number of accounts of people having contact with living little beings, perhaps not this small, because this was obviously a child of some age. Whether you think it's a year old or 6 years old, it was obviously not a full adult, because it did have epiphyseal plates that had not closed. And, of course, you and I, if you take a picture of our legs, we don't have epiphyseal plates because we've already closed our growth plates after we've stopped growing. That's what an epiphyseal plate is. It's where you grow your bone. So the question becomes, are there more of these? Could contact be made? Should we do a CE5 contact expedition there? How exciting is this, Anne?
This is amazing. And, all through the different tribes that I was looking at, people talked about the little people.
Yes.
And there's even a story I came across by a man named Oscar Rodriguez from Mexico City. He's a Mayan historian, and he talks about seeing photographs of a little being, 19 centimeters long, that was photographed by an anthropologist friend of his. This had been found in the Yucatan. And so this being had actually been witnessed by villagers leaving an ET craft. They'd actually seen a craft land.
Right.
This being left. The being died and was picked up and preserved by the villagers. But this anthropologist was on the scene at the right time and was allowed to take pictures and measure it. And the sound of it is so similar to what you're describing with this little being from the desert.
Well, are these pictures available?
I don't know, but we could track that down.
Oh, we must, because now here's why. We have just in the last couple of weeks found, and I remember this, because I'm a doctor, medical doctor, and also the head of Disclosure Project. Back in 1996, I was contacted about a little ET that a woman had found or captured in Russia. And she, unfortunately, took it into her home, and I understand that she was not altogether a sound mind or something, but apparently it died in her possession. And this little being was named Alexis, Alexis, and this is actually on the Internet. And so Dr. Nolan and I recently received a videotape and photographs of this being. it turns out that it looks, the skull at least, and what have you, that we can tell, this is an old 1996 photograph and video, looks like very similar to this being. It's small. It's obviously more older because it looks like it's more like the size you're discussing, more like 8 to 12 inches instead of a little 6 inches. And it's a physical specimen. And they were in the process of doing what we're doing now with this being when the FSB, or so the report says, which is what the KGB of the Soviet Union became the FSB, which is their intelligence service, confiscated the body and it's never been seen since. So what happened is that when I first heard about this in 1996, I had not seen the photos and videos that somebody had taken, but they had contacted me. But by the time those folks found me and I got back to them, this little body, deceased body, had been confiscated. And so there was really nothing to follow up on. However, what's interesting is that the photographs of it look very similar to the being from the Atacama Desert, but this one was found and captured in Russia. And so then the question becomes, are they related? Well, it could be, because here's something that's very strange. You and I have 6 skull bones, right? Everyone go to your atlas of humans have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 skull bones. The creature, this little Atacama humanoid, has 4. And when I was reading the report on the one from this one found in Russia, it has 4 skull bones.
Wow. Yep.
Okay. So now this doesn't mean they're the same, but boy, there's sure some similarities. So this is becoming even more fascinating just in the last week or two. So this is a developing event and story, and I think that, of course, if it was on any subject except UFOs and extraterrestrials, there would be a Scientific American and Harvard University and a CNN and every network in the world doing something on it. But the point I'm making is that it certainly needs more follow-up, because what we have got to do is do a true ethnographic examination, as you've begun, on the story of contact and ancestors from the stars, and see if that's just not all mythology. I mean, my gut instinct has always been that it's not, that the natives and ancient peoples knew what they were talking about when they said they had contact, and that in fact they had ancestors that were from the stars. And maybe that's what we're just now beginning to be able to examine scientifically, because again, this work is not being done by ufologists or aficionados of the UFO subject or New Age sort of folks. These are the most hardcore Ivy League scientists in the world, and they're coming up with these kind of reports, as Dr. Lockman said, that he finds this surprising, that this 6-inch being would be 6 to 8 years of age, and that the findings that he's seen don't conform to any known skeletal abnormality that he has ever seen. And this is, he's the clinical professor on the subject at Stanford University and literally wrote the textbook on it. So I think that the question then becomes, we can prove it's not a hoax because we have all the data. We can prove it has DNA. We can prove that it's not a fetus. And now we can prove that the genes have a lot that are like human, but there's some things that aren't adding up. And now that may be a manual DNA genetic study that could take a year or more, is what I'm hearing. So I want to put that caveat in there, because this is all very preliminary, and it's a little bit one of my concerns, and I want to be on the record, everyone listening, and the transcript of this needs to be put out there, is that when you try to take something that's an unknown and run it through a computerized system that involves billions of bits of data, literally billions, and hundreds of millions of base pairs and genetic material. And that's what you have to do, because you basically take the known mapping of the human genome and you put a sample like this in, but it's being done by computer algorithms. So the question is, it's kind of like all things with computers, garbage in, garbage out. How much of this needs to be looked at manually? Well, that, unfortunately, is a very laborious and expensive. As I said, doing the human genome originally cost something on the order of $5 billion and took 10 years and hundreds of scientists doing it.